All right. I appreciate those who are joining us tonight for the Bible study. As I have mentioned in our group messages, there's been a slight change up that Dr. Martin is not going to be doing it for us today. So I'd ask you to pray for Brother Toller. I'm not really sure what the circumstances are, but he had to be in the hospital. I understand it's something to do with his heart or some medical condition, but he's been in the hospital for a few days now. He thought he was going to be out in time to do the Bible study today. So I just found out a few hours ago that they weren't going to be able to do it on their side. So instead of canceling, I had actually already messed up the way I labeled this because I wasn't thinking when I made the video that it would be Dr. Martin's turn. So I listed it as one of my Bible studies on the Scorner. And so I prayed about whether to do it or not tonight because I'm actually sick as well. I've been sick since yesterday, feeling quite a bit better today, though. But having been sick myself, I wasn't sure if it was better to just cancel tonight or keep going. And so I decided after a while, since I was starting to feel better, to press on. So if you see any issues of me struggling with my words or my thoughts or anything like that, just know that I'm a little bit sick. I also see my internet connection's not good, so give me a second to correct that. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the Scorner tonight. Let me bring up the chart so that we can see how this fits into our wisdom chart. Okay, looking at the wisdom chart to see where the Scorner fits in, you'll notice that scornfulness is on the orange side next to foolishness, and it would be the opposite of understanding. It would be the counterpart to that. You'll notice that with all of these things, there's always an opposite. We saw with wisdom, there's foolishness. Apply your knowledge and know how to use that knowledge to build stuff with that knowledge, as we talked about last week. Foolishness is an inability to do that. That doesn't mean somebody's actually incapable of sounding intelligent. They can sound intelligent. They just don't actually put the things together correctly. So they'll say stuff sometimes that sounds, somebody who's foolish will sometimes say something that sounds good, but when you actually weigh it out and measure it to see if it makes sense, you'll find it doesn't really hold up. They're not using that properly. Whatever bit of information they're trying to give you, they're not applying it well. And so with understanding, part of where you'll find out the connection between understanding and scornfulness is when you notice that understanding and wisdom go hand in hand together. Foolishness and scornfulness go hand in hand together. Also, as you begin to notice that understanding generates humility, whereas scornfulness generates pride, that's where you start to see that these two things go together. However, I think the biggest thing is just to study what it is. And as we study what it is, you'll see why this is an opposite to understanding. Why, if understanding gives you an ability to take information and break it down into its basic parts and understand what it means, scornfulness keeps you from doing that. It limits your ability to do so. Okay, so giving that introduction, let's take the wisdom chart down. Let's dive into a study of scornfulness and understanding. We'll look at two of them together to some degree. As just like we did with foolishness, we'll contrast it against where that was contrasted against wisdom. This will be contrasted against understanding. So our first verse is Proverbs 9, verses 7 and 8. We'll actually go all the way down to verse 12. It says, "He that reproveth a scorner getteth to himself shame, and he that rebuketh a wicked man getteth himself a blot. Reprove not a scorner, lest he hate thee. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love thee." So the first thing you have to notice about a scorner is this attitude they have towards learning. That if you try to reprove them, if you correct them, they hate you for that. Let's think about what he's saying there. If you reprove a scorner, you're going to bring shame to yourself because they don't want to hear it. They hate you for correcting them. Whereas if you rebuke a wise man, he rebuketh a wicked man, you get also a blot, it says. But if you rebuke a wise man, is the last part of verse 8, it says he will love thee. So your contrast is that someone who has wisdom in their heart, which again will grow with understanding, someone who has wisdom within their heart, when you rebuke them and show them they're wrong about something, the Bible says no chastisement is pleasurable for the present. So they may not like what you say the moment you say it, because nobody really likes to be called out on something they're wrong about in the beginning. However, as they have time to process that and break it down and understand what you said to them and see that you're correct, a wise person will love you because you corrected them. You showed them where they're wrong about something, and they're glad to have that. Whereas the scorner, which again is going to go hand in hand with foolishness, they're not interested in actually learning how to rightly use their information. They don't want that. They want to be left alone to go in their own devices. So maybe with that foundation, the best thing would be to give some definitions for what a scorner is and what the word scorn means. A scorner, by definition, is one that scorns, a contemner, a despiser, a scoffer, a derider. Those are some of the synonymous words, words that are being used to define it here. Let's see if I can find scorn real quick to give you a definition for scorn, because I want you to understand that scorn and scorner don't have the exact same definition. That a scorner is a specific person, whereas the act of scorning something is something else altogether. And I'll show you that later on, because we find that God scorns certain things. We find that wise men will scorn certain things. So the act of scorning is not in itself wrong. It's when you become scornful towards information. It's when you become scornful towards wisdom and towards being rebuked. That's what makes you a scorner, and that's what's wrong. So make sure you understand that as we go into this. The act of scorning is to have contempt for something, to have disdain that springs from a person's opinion of the meanness of an object. So let me put it like this. The act of scorning is when you have your very strong opinion about something and you don't you look down on this other thing. When you look at this other thing, you disdain that. So the scorner is someone who disdains wisdom, someone who disdains understanding, someone who looks down on the information that is correct and would rather be left alone to their own devices, to their own form of, let's say, wisdom, their own ideas of how they see the world around them. So similar to what you see with the foolish man, you note that the first point about a scorner is very similar. The difference being that the fool doesn't have the ability to learn because he can't process the information that's being given to him, whereas a scorner is not willing to learn. Scorner is absolutely adamant that he's right, and he's not willing to be told that he's wrong about anything. And that's what we're seeing when we go back to our first verse we read there of Proverbs 9, verse 7 and 8. He that reproveth the scorner getteth himself ashamed, and rebuketh the wicked man getteth himself a blot. Reprove not a scorner, lest he hate thee. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love thee. Then verse 9 says, give instruction to a wise man, and he'll be yet the wiser. Teach a just man, and he'll increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. For by me thy days shall be multiplied, and the years of thy life shall it be increased. If thou be wise, thou shalt be wise for thyself, but if thou scornest, thou shalt bear it alone. So he's telling us that if we're scornful, if we're not willing to be taught, it's our own problem. We're the ones who are going to have to bear the consequences of that if we're not willing to learn. So that gives you a little bit of an idea, some degree of understanding of what the scorner is. So with that, let's move through a few passages and we'll try to understand a little bit more about the scorner. So our next verse is Proverbs 13, verse 1. I already gave greetings to most people when I started, but I see I have some friends coming in from the U.S., Brother Smith and some others. So I give my greetings to you as well, those who are watching it on Facebook. So Proverbs 13 and verse 1 says, a wise son heareth his father's instruction, but a scorner heareth not rebuke. So you have this contrast, whereas a wise man is someone who, we saw this, that a wise man is someone who wants to take in information. He's someone who wants to receive information. He wants to be taught. He wants to listen. He bows his ear to the information that's being given to him. With a scorner, you're seeing that opposite side of this, that you have someone who's not willing. They don't want to hear it. They're not interested. Whatever you have to say, it's not going to get through. I've always compared it to a cup that's already full, so there's no room to put anything else in it. And in the case of the scorner, you're going to see that he's someone who's so full of himself that there's no room to receive anything else. Then Proverbs 14 and verse 6 says, a scorner seeketh wisdom and findeth it not, but knowledge is easy to him that understandeth. So he's giving you this contrast that someone who has understanding, it's easy for him to increase in his information because he knows how to break it down. He knows how to collect the individual components and where to file those away. Someone who has understanding has an ability to do that. But because the scorner is already set in his ways, he's already determined that his way of viewing the world is correct. Nobody's going to move him on that. Because he has that pride about him that he's not willing to be taught anything, what you have with the scorner is that even if he says he wants wisdom, he's not going to find it. Wisdom is just not available to him because he's not really willing to receive it. So that's where you find a scorner seeketh wisdom and findeth it not. Now I'll show you a verse in a minute that shows you that the issue is that he doesn't really want wisdom. That he may say, oh, I'm going to go read these books. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to educate myself. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to do whatever. But in reality, the scorner is not willing to receive the information that's being given. He just wants somebody to confirm his views of the world that he already has. Then Proverbs, I'll give with this because this is showing you that this idea that they are an opposite, that one has an easy ability to take in information, the other one does not. Proverbs 19, I'll give you with that. Proverbs 19 and verse 15, because it's a build up to that idea as well. Proverbs 19 and maybe I mean 25, because 15 is not correct. A scorner loveth one that reproveth him. No, smite a scorner, and the simple will beware. Reprove one that hath understanding, and he will understand knowledge. So the idea is, if you take someone who is a scorner and you smite them, nothing is going to be produced from that. He's saying if you hit them to beat them, to show them that they're wrong, still not going to make any difference. So you remember, that's similar to what's said about the fool. The fool says even if you beat him 100 times, it's still not going to enter into his heart. So he's saying even if you hit this scorner, he's still not going to get the point. However, the simple will see that and learn something from it, because the simple is just somebody who lacks information. It's not necessarily somebody who lacks an ability to gain information. So we'll talk about that in a few weeks. And one that reprove one that hath understanding, and he will understand knowledge. So there's where you're seeing that someone who has understanding, that ability to take information, which that's what knowledge is, to take that information and to break it down and store it away inside of him. The one that has understanding is going to increase in that knowledge. He's going to store it away and have more of it. The one who is scornful is just not going to be able to do that because he's not willing to. It's really an issue of willingness. That's what you have to understand, is more so where the foolish man doesn't have a heart for it. The scorner doesn't have a heart for it either, but it's because of his pride. It's because he just doesn't care to be changed. He doesn't care to be budged. He's not willing to receive any other information. He thinks he's got it all figured out. That's where you see is the opposite of understanding. Understanding really helps you to see that you don't have it all figured out and a need to break it down and understand it better, whereas the scorner is not willing to change his view on anything. He's not willing to be taught anything. He's not willing to be helped because he thinks he's got it figured out already. I would compare it to most, just to be honest with you, there's a lot of groups you can compare it to, but I think a lot of times you see this with teenagers, that they reach a certain point in their life that you're starting to increase in your ability to understand information. So you think you've got it all figured out, but in reality, you don't. You're missing some of the pieces. And so you start to think you're more intelligent than everybody else. And your parents are trying to tell you you're wrong about this. You're not. You don't have all the pieces of this puzzle, so you can't put it together yet. And because you've reached a point in your life where you think you're smarter than everybody, you don't listen. You don't take that advice, and you make some mistakes. That's what I would compare like a scorner with a teenager in that regard. You see that very often. Then Proverbs 15 and verse 12. A scorner loveth not one that reproveth him, neither will he go unto the wise. So this is what we've been saying this whole time. The scorner doesn't actually want wisdom. He's not willing to go to you if you're going to tell him he's wrong. If you're going to tell him he's right, you're going to affirm his views of the world already, then he's perfectly happy to hear, for you to talk to him. But a scorner is not willing to be confronted with any other views. He's not willing to be confronted with the truth. He's not willing to be told when he's wrong. And so because of this, the scorner just can't grow. He can't understand something because he's not willing to understand something. He can't, increase his knowledge about something. He can't be fixed on a problem because he's just not willing to do that. He's too stubborn and set in his ways to actually learn anything new or to learn how to apply that information. And that's why in reality, this is one of the most dangerous things you can have in terms of these side of unintelligence. The foolish man is very dangerous because you'll see he eventually gets to a place where he intentionally misapplies the information, or he intentionally misuses it. That's what the froward is. But you see with the scorner, he's going into pride, which we'll talk about in a moment. But because he's going into pride and because he's not willing to learn, it's one of the most dangerous places you can be in this life, is when you're not willing to be taught. You're not willing to learn or to be helped. We have to be open to learn. It's something the Bible even tells us one of the fruits of the Spirit is meekness. And so if you really want a great opposite, now in terms of this structure of wisdom that's discussed in Proverbs, the opposite is going to be understanding. However, if you want a true opposite to scornfulness within the Bible, it may be meekness, because meekness is an ability to put aside your opinions and so forth to actually learn. It's a willingness, to keep yourself in subjection so that you can be taught. It's a teachability. So you see that scornfulness is not just an issue of the intelligence, it's also a spiritual issue. It's a heart issue as well. So let's then look to Proverbs 19 and verse 29. It says, judgments are prepared for scorners and stripes for the back of fools. The same way he says, because the problem with the fool is in his heart. His heart's just not geared toward wisdom. It's just not geared towards actually taking the information that's being given to him and knowing how to use that properly. It's just not made that way, because in his heart, he says there is no God. In his heart, he's not willing to view the world that way. So because of this, he says the only way to really pierce through to a fool many times is to be rough with him, to be very coarse. In this case, he's talking about actually beating him, to get it through. Now, we know that's not normally what's literally given, but for example, if you have a child who's a little bit foolish, not willing to actually learn or increase or scornful, then sometimes you have to give a spanking in order to get through that pride to help them. And that's what he's giving here with the scorner. He's saying you actually, sometimes you have to spank him, maybe figuratively, not literally, but you'll have to spank him just to get through to his heart, because it's full of pride. It's ate up with pride. And that's why, like, for example, I didn't plan on doing a lesson on spanking children, but when you spank a child, it's not just to satisfy your wrath or any of that kind of stuff. You do it to drive out pride enough that you can pierce through to the heart and get through to them. And that's kind of the idea he's using here with the scorner. If you want to get through to him, sometimes you have to be a little bit rough. Sometimes you have to say something that's not so nice to get him to wake up and realize how foolish he's being, how he's not willing to hear what you have to say. Sometimes you have to be a little bit rough with him. I would compare it, actually, the best thing I think to compare that to is reprobate. That normally when you read verses about a reprobate, it says there's no hope, there's no hope, there's no hope. But if you pay attention, there is hope. It's just very narrow, because when you get over, I guess, to Titus, he tells you to rebuke him sharply so that he may be found sound in the faith. So he's saying someone who's reprobate, someone whose mind is worthless and incapable of producing anything good or value. He says, take that person aside and rebuke them sharply. Don't just play nice with them. Don't just try to avoid any confrontation. Be confrontational with them and show them the foolishness of their ways. Maybe, just maybe, then if you're hard with them, you'll be able to get through that hard heart. You'll be able to get through that pride. And that's what he's saying here with the scorner. He says similar things about the foolish man, that sometimes you just have to be rough with them. Sometimes you have to be very straightforward. Sometimes you have to show them the foolishness of what they're saying. You have to call them out on it in order to help that person ever have a chance of realizing where they're wrong. And you think about that. If somebody's already ate up with pride so much that they feel like I'm right, everybody else is wrong, I'm not willing to be moved on this, how else can you get through to them other than being a little bit rough sometimes? Now, don't take that as permission to just go around being mean to everybody, because the Bible tells us to let our words be seasoned with salt. It tells us to let our words be gracious. There's a time and a place for this, and it's not every time you disagree with somebody. Your word shouldn't be sharp every time you disagree with somebody. You shouldn't be harsh and cutting and mean. I mean, that's something I've had even, I guess, probably still struggle with more than I realize, is it's easy for me to be very sharp and cutting with my words. But normally in conversation, that's something God tells you not to do, not to be harsh and cutting with your words. It's only when you're dealing with somebody like this who just can't get it. Sometimes you got a child that they're just proud and not going to hear anything you have to say. Sometimes you have to give a spanking to get through. Sometimes you have an adult who's just not willing to listen or understand anything. Sometimes you have to be a little bit rough in the way you answer them. But it's something you have to be careful. This is not a method that needs to be thrown out at everybody you disagree with. In fact, I'll just be honest. If you're the one who's throwing it out at everybody you disagree with, you're probably the scorner. Because the scorner usually talks with fury and with pride. So does the fool. So if you're comfortable to talk down and hurt everybody, then that's what a scorner does. A scorner talks down to you because he considers your opinion to be worthless. He considers your opinion to be lower than his. That's what we saw in the definition of it, that he has a disdain for your opinion because you're just not as smart as him. You don't have this figured out as well as he does. So if you're comfortable to talk down to everybody in that way, you may actually be the scorner. I'm just giving that out as a warning because I don't want anybody to use my words against me and say that I have permission to go out and be rude to everybody, because that's not at all what he's saying here. He's just saying to use your words wisely, that when you see this pride filled up in somebody's heart, sometimes you have to cut a little bit to get through that. All right, then Proverbs 21. This is where we begin to see pride more and more coming out in it. Proverbs 21, verse 24 says, "A proud and haughty scorner is his name, who dealeth in proud wrath." So that's where you see the one who's so proud and so quick to jump out and just say whatever mean things come to his mind, to talk down to you, to belittle you for your opinions. That's also probably the scorner. You find that if you study out a wise man or a man of understanding, both of them tend to be easy to entreat. They're easy to talk to. They're easy to seek advice from. God tells you that about them. Whereas the fool and the scorner are the two that don't like to be questioned. They're the two who, if you disagree with me, you must be a dummy. You must be stupid if you disagree with me. So it is actually a sign of foolishness in our heart if we're so proud that if somebody would dare disagree or ask questions, we have to get fussy about it. We want to fight about that. And I can almost guarantee most of us struggle with that more than we realize. Proverbs 22 and verse 10 says, "Cast out the scorner, and contention shall go out, yea, strife and reproach shall cease." So this shows you that more than probably anything else I've said tonight, that the real issue of the scorner, at the heart of him, is his pride. The fact that he's telling you if you'll get rid of him, then the contention will go out with him. And the reason I say that is because Proverbs 13 and verse 10 says that only by pride cometh contention. So if the scorner is the source of contention, if you have a group, let's say, and in that group there's always fighting, there's always bickering, it seems like nobody can ever get along, and then you just have this one person who, if you can get rid of them, it would get rid of all of it. That's the one who's proud. It's not just that he's the scorner, that's the one who's proud, because the Bible says only by pride cometh contention. Contention being, this always having that tension between you and people, always, everything leads to bickering, everything leads to fighting. He's saying if that's the case, pride has to be involved. And that's something you need to understand in your own personal life, even if you don't feel like you struggle with some of the stuff I've talked about tonight. If you and your spouse are always fighting, if you and your friends are always fighting, if you and whoever are always fighting, somebody is struggling with pride, and usually it's both of you. Usually both of you are struggling with pride, because if both of you let go of pride, the contention will cease, because only by pride cometh contention. So the truth is that in a marriage, if one person sets out with the intention, okay, tomorrow I'm just going to be more humble about this, I'm not going to fight about everything, and then they wake up to a spouse who wants to fight about everything, then it doesn't matter. There's still going to be contention. Either that or one person's going to live in an abusive relationship. So both of you have to cast out pride. Both of you have to say, I'm going to let go of my pride. Because you'll know this. If you're standing up to fight against something, pride is the heart of the issue. It's pride that's making you feel like you have to fight about this. That's not to say there's never times where you feel like you have to stand up for something for the right reasons. However, if it's leading into contention and not just explaining the reasoning, if it's actually becoming a fight, then pride is at the heart of it. Because that's always going to be the case. Somebody's a proud person is what's causing the fighting to come about, according to the Bible. It says only by pride cometh contention. But that shows you that since casting out the scorner gets rid of contention, that the real issue of the scorner is the pride that's there. And that's why you'll note, if you think back to our chart, the wisdom chart, you'll find that the product of the scorner, if he's left to his ways, is a proud and haughty spirit, where he just oozes and saturated with pride. He's just dripping with pride. All you can see is his pride. He just has that spirit about him of someone who thinks he's better than you. Now, saying all of that, I do want you to note something. I said in the beginning that God doesn't just use the word scorn to talk about the one who thinks he's better than everybody. Proverbs 3:34 says that God scorneth the scorners. Surely he scorneth the scorners, but giveth grace unto the lowly. In that verse, you're reminded, who does he give grace to in the Bible? And who does he hold back? God resisteth the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. God's not accidentally connecting those two thoughts. He's showing you very plainly that the issue with the scorner is a heart full of pride, a heart that's eaten up and full of itself, eaten up with pride, so that there's no room for it to receive any other information. So if you want to know what a scorner is tonight, the easy answer is that he's someone so full of himself. He's so proud of his ideas and his way of thinking, so proud of his opinion that there's no room for him to take in any new information. He can't break down new information and store it because there's no room for it. He's already filled up with his own opinions and his own ideas, and there's no room for him to be taught because of that. It's a cup that's full of itself. I mean, that's what it is. It's why there's no room to pour anything into it, because it's a cup that's already full. And it's not like you can, displace what's there by pouring something new in. No, because it's full of itself. There's no room for anything in there. It's a cup that has no storage inside of it. So for you and I to understand this, we have to realize that the choices in our life, as far as being wise and understanding or foolish and scornful, is that if we let the fear of the Lord touch our heart or unbelief touch our heart, it's going to drive us in one of two directions. Someone whose heart is driven by unbelief is going to reach a place where their opinions, their views, that's all that matters. No information is worth processing. Nothing else is worth considering. And then because of that, it's also going to put them in a situation where whatever information is being given to them, they don't know how to use it. They can't apply it, because it's their whole view is skewed by their personal opinion, because their opinion is supreme. Their view of the world is supreme. Their ideology is supreme. Nothing else can compete with that, not even the word of God. Whereas you see someone whose heart is touched by the fear of the Lord, so they begin to open their view to the world around them, and begin to realize, that, and I understand it's a journey from wisdom to sound wisdom, where someone's lining up their mind, their view of things completely with God. So I don't want you to think that just because I say somebody has wisdom, it means they're completely surrendered to the Bible. It's a scale. Everything has a scale to it, like this. But as you start down that direction, you find that the man who's open to see things from God's point of view and willing to see the truth and not just shut it down because it disagrees with him, that man will begin to have a better understanding of the information that's coming to him, so they can break it down, and then he can use it to build it back up and come to new, better conclusions with it. That's the relationship between these four things, between wisdom and knowledge, wisdom and understanding, and then foolishness and scornfulness. It's this relationship wherein you have a choice to shut down everything that disagrees with you and not be willing to hear anything or learn anything, and therefore you have an inability to properly use your information that you have, or you have the choice to open up to what God says and hear what he's showing you, and little by little you'll begin to have a better understanding and a better grasp of the world around you, a better ability to use that information. Now, should you choose to go down the path of scornfulness, where you just disdain everything else that disagrees with you, because understand, it's not a sin to scorn something. There's lots of things you should scorn as being beneath you. That's why God says he scorns the scorner, because they're beneath him. It's, this person who's not willing to learn, he considers them to be beneath him. So it's not that the act of scorning something is in itself sin. It's when you become a scorner, which is where you get to the place where information is being given to you, you consider everything to be below you that disagrees with you. That's the danger. And if you go down that path, you're going to be eaten up with pride. You're going to become a proud and haughty person. You're going to find yourself growing in foolishness, and probably even to the point of being a froward person, wherein you intentionally will bend the information and twist the facts so as to support your ideas, no matter how wrong they may be. So that's my lesson for tonight. Maybe I tried to get back down close to 30 minutes, and I'm even finishing a little bit before, but also, as I said in the beginning, I've been quite sick since yesterday. I'm not sure if I'm having a bout of tonsillitis come in again, because I don't really have a sore throat or anything. If it's not sure, I don't think it's COVID at all, because I don't have any loss of smell or anything. I just haven't felt good. So we're fine. Everything's on schedule. I'm already starting to feel better, and I'll be fine by tomorrow. But anyways, I appreciate your prayers for Brother Toller and whatever situation is going on there with him, that we had to move the Bible study with Dr. Martin until next week. I assume we'll pick back up with him. But thank you for being here. If you have any questions, I'll try to take those real quick. Like I said, I'm not so sick that I can't take questions. It's just not in the best clarity of mind today. All right, so if we have any questions, feel free to ask those. I know it takes time to send those in. Hopefully everything makes sense in regards to what the difference between a scorner and so forth, all of this is. I appreciate Brother Smith said he's praying for me. I appreciate your prayers for me as well. Oh, also, I'll mention if anybody didn't get the message on Facebook or on the group, we woke up to something quite interesting yesterday. Woke up to the sign on the church getting ripped off and blown over into this light pole next to where I park the van a lot of times. So if you drive by the church and notice half the sign's missing, it's because the hurricane or storm or whatever we're calling it, Eunice, decided to take our sign with it. So it's laying in the front of the church because, as I said, I didn't feel well, so I didn't have a lot of strength to be lugging it around to wherever I needed to put it because it actually is metal. But anyways, that sign is completely beat up and damaged. I don't think we'll be able to put it back. So I've got to look at how fast I can get a new sign made and put up for anybody who's curious about that situation. And then also, I'll mention that we had some other stuff going on, but I won't talk about that in a public format. So, anyways, just remember to pray for one another. I don't see any questions coming in. I appreciate you being here to be a part of the study. I'll go ahead and throw up that leave an amen in the comments banner. But thank you for everyone who is part of the study with us tonight. I hope it's a help to you and encouragement to always be open to grow and learn. Of course, use the Bible as your foundation, and let the Bible be the authority. But be open to learn and grow, and be willing to consider things. Otherwise, you shut the door to wisdom. You shut the door to knowledge. And of course, you shut the door to understanding. All right. Thank you for being here. We're going to close out the study for tonight. We look forward to seeing everybody at church tomorrow.